How can a daughter kill her parents and live with their bodies for 4 years without being discovered? An unbelievable story, but it is true. Today we will explore a shocking case that has left many people in disbelief. The story of Virginia McCullock, a woman who killed her parents and lived with their bodies for 4 years. Everything began in 2019, when Virginia was living with her parents, John and Lois, in a house in Essex, England. Her parents were both in their 70s and required special care. Instead of being a devoted daughter, Virginia was a fraudster. She not only deceived her parents about her job, but also secretly stole their money, pushing them into massive debt. Eventually, Virginia realized that the only way to escape the financial troubles she had created was to kill her parents. But what happened when Virginia carried out this horrific crime? How did she manage to go undetected for 4 long years, living alongside her parents' bodies without anyone suspecting a thing? To uncover the chilling details of this case and the investigative journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the upcoming videos. Virginia McCullock was born in 1988 and grew up in what seemed like an ordinary family in Essex, England. Her father, John McCullock, was a university lecturer and a well-known author, while her mother, Lois, was a homemaker. The McCullock family had 5 daughters in total, with Virginia being the youngest. In a large family like this, one might assume that Virginia was raised with love and care from her parents, but the reality was quite different. People who knew the family described John and Lois as strict parents with a rigid parenting style. They were not particularly affectionate and enforced strict household rules. According to Virginia, her mother was obsessed with cleanliness, constantly cleaning and disinfecting everything in the house while imposing strict hygiene regulations. Lois also suffered from severe anxiety and rarely socialized with neighbors. Meanwhile, John was extremely disciplined, following a fixed routine and spending little time with his children. While the other McCulloch children seemed to adapt to their upbringing, Virginia felt suffocated, lonely, and neglected. However, one crucial point to note: Virginia was the only member of the family who claimed to have been mistreated. She alleged that her mother was short-tempered, frequently yelling and violent. According to Virginia, her mother often hit her even when she was already grown. However, Virginia's sisters refuted these claims, stating that she was fabricating and distorting the truth. This led many to question: was Virginia truly a victim, or was this just another part of her web of lies? Unlike her sisters, who left home to build their own lives, Virginia remained with her parents. In her 20s, she had no stable job, no friends, and no significant social relationships. She spent most of her time at home, relying entirely on her parents. Virginia not only failed in her career, but also struggled to form personal connections. Her sisters described her as odd, difficult to approach, and prone to compulsive lying. Over time, Virginia became increasingly dependent on her parents, not as a dutiful daughter, but as a predator. She began controlling their finances, manipulating them into believing she had a stable job, when in reality, she was draining the family's assets. She pretended to be sick, lied about being pregnant, and fabricated elaborate stories to cover up her theft. With each passing day, Virginia became more entangled in her lies, until she realized there was only one way to escape her situation: killing her parents. From that moment, Virginia began plotting one of the most shocking crimes in British history. Virginia McCullock lived with her parents not to care for them, but to take advantage of them. Without a stable job, she lied to her parents about working while secretly gaining control over their finances. Under the guise of helping, Virginia convinced them to hand over their bank account management, gradually withdrawing money, opening credit cards, and spending recklessly. She used their money for shopping, online gambling, and a lavish lifestyle, eventually pushing them into debt. When her parents began to suspect something was wrong, Virginia did not stop. Instead, she fabricated a series of lies. She told them their accounts had been hacked, the bank had made errors, and even forged documents to convince them that their money would soon be refunded. To make the deception more believable, she impersonated bank employees and police officers when speaking to them. Despite her efforts to cover up the fraud, Virginia knew she could not keep up the charade forever. As her anxiety grew, Virginia started considering an extreme solution: killing her parents. In her twisted mind, this was not only the only way to escape her financial troubles, but also a way to continue using their identities to access their money without raising suspicion. Starting in March 2019, Virginia began preparing. She stockpiled a large quantity of sedatives and painkillers, medications her parents already used regularly. To test their effects, she secretly mixed small doses into their food, observing their reactions to determine the right amount. At the same time, she purchased a sharp knife and a hammer as a backup plan in case the poisoning failed. After 3 months of planning, Virginia decided to act on the night of June 17, 2019. She prepared a glass of Guinness for her father and a soft drink for her mother, mixing in a high dose of medication. Her father drank the entire glass without suspicion and went to bed as usual. Her mother, however, only drank part of her beverage, making Virginia anxious, but she could not force her to drink more. The next morning, Virginia checked on them and found that her father had died in his sleep. But her mother was still alive, though fatigued and disoriented due to the effects of the drugs. The plan had not gone as expected, and Virginia had no choice but to move to her backup plan. She grabbed the hammer and entered her mother's room, delivering a powerful blow to her head. But instead of losing consciousness instantly, Lois turned to her daughter and weakly asked, "What are you doing?" At that moment, Virginia could have stopped, but instead of stepping back, she continued. She stabbed her mother multiple times in the neck and chest, but Lois was still breathing. In a panic, Virginia picked up the hammer again and struck her repeatedly on the head until she was completely lifeless. Finally, she took her mother's hand, kissed it, and whispered an apology, but it was far too late. After committing the crime, Virginia showed no fear or remorse. She calmly cleaned up the scene, erased any evidence, and began executing her plan to conceal the murders. But how did she manage to live with her parents' bodies for 4 years without being discovered? After killing her parents, Virginia McCullock showed no fear or remorse. Instead, she calmly covered up her crime by keeping their bodies inside the house, turning it into a horrifying crime scene that no one knew about. First, Virginia dragged her father's body into his study, wrapped it in multiple layers of plastic, and built a concrete wall around it, creating a tomb inside the house. With her mother, it was easier. She placed the body inside a wardrobe on the second floor, sealed it with duct tape, and blocked it with concrete slabs. After that, she cleaned the crime scene, disposed of any evidence, and continued living as if nothing had happened. To avoid suspicion, Virginia impersonated her parents for 4 years. She texted her sisters, mimicked her mother's voice during phone calls, and even wrote birthday and Christmas cards in their names. She fabricated stories about her parents traveling or being unwell and not wanting to see anyone. Because of these lies, no one in the family suspected anything unusual. Financially, Virginia continued to benefit from her parents' deaths. She withdrew money from their pensions and benefits, even opening credit cards under their names. With this money, she lived comfortably, buying clothes, jewelry, and gambling online. Although she was skilled at deception, Virginia's behavior became increasingly strange. She would stand outside for hours, pointlessly sweeping leaves. She tried to befriend neighbors and local shop owners, frequently mentioning her parents as if they were still alive. She even made multiple calls to the police, complaining about her neighbors or reporting false incidents. Over 4 years, Virginia called the police 238 times, leading some to wonder if she was subconsciously trying to get caught. Despite this, she continued living undisturbed in the house, where the 2 bodies slowly decomposed. Neighbors started noticing something odd. Her house was always closed, and the curtains were never drawn. Some began questioning the long absence of her parents, but Virginia always had an excuse ready to cover it up. Finally, in 2023, the truth began to surface. Her parents' doctor grew suspicious when they had not visited for 4 years, despite having severe health conditions. When the police launched an investigation, Virginia tried to mislead them, claiming that her parents were away and had left their phones behind. But the lie couldn't last forever. On September 15, 2023, police arrived at her house with a search warrant. When confronted, Virginia did not panic. Instead, She calmly admitted to the crime and even pointed out where she had hidden her parents' bodies. The 4-year-long deception had finally come to an end. After 4 years of hiding her crime, Virginia McCullock could no longer keep up the deception. In September 2023, her parents' doctor grew suspicious when they had not been seen for years, despite their serious medical conditions. Sensing something was wrong, the clinic reported the case to the police. On September 15, 2023, the police arrived at Virginia's house with a search warrant. When they entered, she did not panic, but calmly faced them. When asked if there was anything in the house they should know about, she simply replied, "Yes, let me show you." She led the officers to the study, where her father's body was entombed behind a concrete wall. Then, she pointed upstairs to the second floor, where her mother's body had been stuffed inside a wardrobe. The officers present that day could hardly believe what they were witnessing. During interrogation, Virginia showed no remorse or anxiety. She coolly recounted the details of the murder, from poisoning her parents to finishing off her mother when she was still alive. When asked why she did it, she stated that she had no other choice. She was afraid of being exposed as a financial fraud. Virginia not only admitted to her crimes, but also maintained an unsettling demeanor. When the police read back her statement for confirmation, she even corrected minor details, such as clarifying that her mother's body was not in a wardrobe, but in a double wardrobe. In one particularly eerie moment, she turned to an officer and remarked, "At least you caught the bad guy." As police continued their investigation, they discovered that over the past 4 years, Virginia had been continuously withdrawing money from her parents' accounts, opening new credit cards in their names, and conducting financial transactions to maintain the illusion that they were still alive. She had been living a completely fabricated life, but in the end, she could not escape justice. Virginia was ultimately convicted of murder. In court, she pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 36 years before she could apply for parole. Her sisters expressed their grief and anger, stating that Virginia had not only taken the lives of their parents, but also robbed them of the chance to say a final goodbye. A crime that spanned 4 years had finally come to an end. But the lingering question remains. Did Virginia truly believe she could conceal her crime forever? Or did she intentionally leave clues, wanting to be caught? After 4 years of concealing her crimes, Virginia McCullock finally faced justice. She was charged with the murder of her parents and financial fraud. In court, Virginia admitted to everything without showing any remorse. She calmly recounted how she committed the murders, hid the bodies, and continued living as if nothing had happened. On October 11, 2024, the court sentenced Virginia to life in prison with a minimum term of 36 years before she could apply for parole. As she listened to the verdict, she showed no reaction, as if it had nothing to do with her. For her remaining family, especially her 4 sisters, the pain was unimaginable. They had lost their parents in the most horrific way and could not comprehend how their own sister could commit such a brutal act. In a joint statement, Virginia's sisters described her actions as disgusting and unforgivable. They were not only heartbroken over the loss of their parents, but also furious that Virginia had deceived them for 4 years. One of the sisters stated that the most painful part was not just losing their parents, but realizing that they had failed to see the truth sooner and prevent the tragedy. The case of Virginia McCullock raises many questions and lessons. How could someone deceive and manipulate their own family for so long? Was Virginia a cold-blooded killer, or was she someone who became so entangled in her own lies that she could no longer escape? This story is also a reminder of the importance of paying attention to family members. Everyone has their own lives, but checking in regularly, communicating, and noticing unusual signs can help prevent tragedies. If someone had questioned the prolonged absence of Virginia's parents earlier, could the outcome have been different? Additionally, this case highlights the dangers of greed and deception. Virginia started as a liar who manipulated her parents for money, but over time, she escalated into a murderer to cover up her mistakes. Crime can never remain buried forever. Eventually, the truth will surface. Ultimately, the story of Virginia McCullock is not just a gruesome murder case. It is a cautionary tale. No one can escape the consequences of their actions.